All units, the mission is complete. Do not attempt rescue. That was the official order. But orders don't reach loyalty. Because somewhere in the dark, a wounded German shepherd was still moving, running on blood and instinct toward the only man who would refuse to walk away. A Navy SEAL about to break the one rule that matters most. Before this night ends, a single word will be whispered, and everything will change. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, subscribe for more stories of faith and quiet miracles on Angels in Uniform. On Anselm, the knock came from behind steel. Not loud, not frantic. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 3 more. Uneven, hesitant, like someone trying to remember how to speak to the world. The sound froze the men on the deck. The night air smelled of salt and oil, heavy and unmoving. The sea around the ship was unnaturally calm, black and flat, reflecting nothing. No wind, no waves, just silence thick enough to feel pressed against the skin. The man at the front raised his hand, signaling stillness. He was 32, tall and powerfully built, with broad shoulders that carried the quiet weight of command rather than arrogance. His face was sharply defined, strong jawline, high cheekbones, sun-weathered skin marked by long days under unforgiving skies. Short, dark brown hair, cut military tight, but grown just enough to soften its severity. Framed blue-gray eyes that had learned restraint the hard way. A short, neatly kept stubble shadowed his face, giving him the look of a man who slept lightly and rarely well. An old steel wristwatch sat scratched and dull against his glove. The kind of watch no one replaces because it carries something irreplaceable with it. In front of him, the dog stopped. A 5-year-old German shepherd, black and tan, compact and muscular, ears upright and rigid with focus. The dog's coat was thick and clean despite the grime of the mission, and a faint scar marked the left shoulder. An old wound, healed badly, but proudly worn. Amber brown eyes fixed on the steel wall as if it were breathing. The dog did not bark, did not whine. He simply stood there, body tense, chest forward, as if listening to something the men could not hear. The knock came again. 3 taps. The dog lowered his head slightly, then pressed his nose against the metal. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not a growl, not fear, but recognition. The man stepped forward and pressed his ear to the steel, breathing, weak, shallow, but alive. They cut through the metal in silence, sparks flashing briefly like dying stars. When the panel fell inward, the smell hit them first. Oil, rust, blood, and something older. Human fear that had learned to conserve itself. 6 figures were huddled inside. 3 women. 3 children. They were thin, their skin stretched tight over fragile bones, eyes too large for their faces. None of them cried. None moved. Fear had taught them stillness was safer than hope. One woman clutched an infant to her chest, her hand pressed firmly over the child's mouth. She was small, dark-haired, her frame narrow and exhausted, her skin pale beneath layers of grime. Her eyes flicked between the men and the exit, calculating danger instead of relief. "Don't cry," she whispered to the child, though the baby was already silent. "Crying makes them come back." A little girl stood just behind her. She looked about 6 or 7, hair dark and tangled around her face, wearing a thin, faded dress far too light for the night air, and an oversized jacket that clearly belonged to someone else. Her feet were bare, soles dirty and cracked. She did not look at the weapons. She did not look at the men. She looked at the dog. Her gaze locked onto him with an intensity that startled the man. There was no panic in her eyes, only a careful, searching question, as if she were deciding whether to believe again. The man shrugged out of his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. She accepted it without a word. He signaled the team to move. They began their retreat through the narrow corridors, steps measured, breaths controlled. Then the engine roared. The sudden sound shattered the silence like glass. Shouts echoed from above. Footsteps pounded down the metal stairs. A figure appeared at the top of the passageway, weapon raised, eyes wide, not with hatred, but with fear. Fear of loss. Fear of losing what he considered property. The first shot tore through the air. The second aimed lower, toward the child being carried. The dog moved. There was no command, no hesitation. His paws slipped briefly on the wet deck, claws scraping against metal, a fraction of a second too slow. And then his body launched forward. The impact was heavy and final. The black and tan form collapsed between the bullet and the child. Blood spread across the deck, dark and indistinguishable from the sea beneath them. The man dropped to his knees. He did not shout. He did not curse. He pressed his forehead against the dog's, breath shaking, voice barely audible. "It's okay," he whispered. "You did good. You did so good." The helicopter arrived in time. The hostages were lifted away into the night, wrapped in blankets and disbelief. The dog was alive, chest rising unevenly, eyes still open, but his back legs lay unmoving beneath him. The world would later call it a successful mission. No one would ask what it cost. Weeks later, in a dimly lit room far from the sea, the man sat alone reviewing footage from the mission. Not because he had to, but because sleep refused to come unless he tried to understand what still echoed in his head. The audio was cluttered with static, boots, metal, breath, then something else. He paused the video, rewound, played it again. Barely audible, almost swallowed by noise, a child's voice whispered a single word, so soft it felt more like breath than sound. "Stay." The man froze. The dog had turned that night before any order was given. He had heard something first. Months passed. The man now lived by the sea, in a weather-worn wooden house that faced the horizon. He slept on the floor because the bed reminded him too much of hospitals. The dog lay beside the porch, rear legs still, head always lifted when the man stood, eyes following him as if waiting for something unfinished. One afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting was uneven, childish. Only one sentence was written inside. "I am still alive." The man folded the letter slowly and placed his hand on the dog's head. For the first time in years, he prayed, not for forgiveness, not for another miracle, but for the strength to live in a way worthy of the one that had already been given. And the question remained, heavier than any command he had ever followed. That night, who saved whom? If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and comment below. Subscribe to Angels in Uniform and walk with us through stories of sacrifice, faith, and the quiet miracles God places in ordinary lives. The hours before the mission passed without ceremony, as they often did. No speeches, no last-minute heroics. Just preparation layered over routine, and routine masking the weight of what everyone already knew but never named. The man sat on the edge of a steel bench inside the dim staging bay, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped. The overhead lights cast a dull sheen across his gear, highlighting scratches and wear that no supply officer ever bothered to replace. He wore his full Navy SEAL combat kit with the ease of long familiarity. Olive drab plate carrier molded to his broad chest, ranger green combat shirt fitted tight across an athletic torso. Dark tactical pants creased and reinforced at the knees, boots scuffed and softened by years of saltwater decks and sand. The old steel wristwatch sat heavy on his left wrist, its face scratched, its tick just a fraction slower than the clocks on the wall. He noticed it again, not because he was superstitious. He had learned early that superstition had no place in his line of work, but because the watch always seemed to draw his attention when he least wanted it to. The second hand lagged behind, stubbornly out of sync. It had belonged to his father, a man who had once worn a uniform of his own and never came back from a mission that looked clean on paper and catastrophic in reality. The watch had stopped the day the notification arrived. It had never truly run right since. Across from him, the dog waited. 5 years old. German Shepherd. Black and tan coat thick and well kept. Muscles dense and efficient beneath the fur. His ears were upright, angled slightly forward, always listening. His amber-brown eyes moved with calm intelligence, tracking small changes in the room. The shift of boots, the hum of engines, the subtle tension in human posture. A simple black tactical harness rested against his chest, worn smooth by use, with no markings beyond necessity. A faint scar crossed his left shoulder, a reminder of a past operation where he had moved faster than anyone expected and paid for it. The dog's posture was disciplined, but his tail rested still against the floor. Not anxious, not relaxed. Waiting. The man reached down and rested his gloved hand briefly on the dog's neck, fingers brushing the thick fur just behind the ears. The dog leaned into the touch for a moment, then straightened again, focus returning forward. They did not need words. They never had. Around them, the rest of the team moved quietly. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Radios clipped, unclipped, and clipped again. One of the operators, a tall, lean man with a narrow face and tired eyes, gave a short nod as he passed, the kind that acknowledged presence without demanding response. No one joked. No one filled the space with noise. Silence was easier to manage than thoughts. The man stood and adjusted the straps on his plate carrier, movements automatic. He glanced once more at the watch. Still slow, he exhaled through his nose and turned away. The loading ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the night beyond. The sea lay waiting, dark and impossibly still, reflecting no stars. The smell of salt carried inward, sharp and familiar. As they moved toward the transport, the dog paused, just for a second. He turned his head back toward the staging bay, ears tilting, eyes fixed on nothing the man could see. His body remained forward-facing, but his attention lingered behind them, as if checking something unseen. The man noticed. He stopped, hand tightening instinctively on the dog's harness. "What is it?" he murmured. Not a command, just a question. The dog did not respond in the ways humans expected. No bark, no movement, only that steady, unreadable gaze back into the empty space they were leaving behind. The moment stretched. Then the dog turned forward again and stepped onto the ramp, posture returning to perfect alignment. The man followed, unsettled by a feeling he did not want to examine too closely. The transport cut through the water with practiced silence, engines low, hull slicing cleanly through the calm. The team remained still, bodies braced against subtle shifts. The man sat near the bow, one gloved hand resting lightly on the dog's back. He could feel the steady rhythm of muscle and breath beneath his palm. He thought, unexpectedly, of his father, not of his face. Time had blurred those details, but of his voice, calm, unhurried, a voice that never rose even when things went wrong. "If you're ever not sure what to do," his father had once said years ago during a rare visit home between deployments, "don't rush to be the loudest man in the room. Look at the one who's paying attention when no one else is." The man had asked who that was supposed to be. His father had smiled faintly. "Sometimes," he said, "it's the dog." The memory surfaced now without invitation, as the dog's ears twitched again just once, reacting to something beyond human hearing. They reached the target vessel faster than expected. It floated ahead of them like a dark shape cut from the sea itself, its hull scarred and quiet. No lights, no signals, nothing to suggest life. The man felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the moment before action where instinct and discipline met. He checked his watch one last time, still slow. They secured the lines and began their approach. The dog moved first, as trained, paws silent on metal. Halfway across the deck, he stopped again. This time, he turned fully. His eyes met the man's. There was no fear in them, no aggression, only a kind of steady gravity that made the man's breath hitch without understanding why. The man crouched beside him, lowering his head until they were level. "We're good," he whispered, more to himself than the dog. "We're in and out." The dog held his gaze for a heartbeat longer than usual. Then he moved forward. They followed. Later, much later, in a quiet moment the man would replay without mercy. He would remember this pause more clearly than any gunshot. He would realize that this was the instant the dog had checked for permission, not instruction, as if asking whether the man was ready to accept something neither of them could name. Below deck, the air changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in scent that made the dog's muscles tighten beneath the man's hand. Not gunpowder, not oil alone. Something human, old, trapped. The dog's breathing slowed, his tail lifted just slightly, his ears angled toward a wall that looked no different from the others. The man raised his fist. The team halted. The dog moved closer to the steel, nose pressed flat, chest vibrating with a low, controlled sound that traveled straight into the man's bones. "What do you have?" one of the operators whispered. The man did not answer right away. He was watching the dog, reading the tension in his stance, the deliberate stillness. "Something's wrong," he said finally. Not loud, not dramatic, just certain. The knock came moments later. 3 taps. The sound carried through the corridor and into the spaces between breaths. The man felt a cold clarity settle over him. Not fear, not doubt, recognition. He did not know yet what they would find behind the steel, or what would be taken from them before the night ended. He only knew that the dog had been listening long before the rest of them caught up. And for reasons he could not articulate, he felt the weight of a choice pressing down, one that would not be written into any report and could not be undone. If this chapter moved you, please like, share, and comment below. Subscribe to Angels in Uniform to continue exploring stories of sacrifice, quiet faith, and the unseen miracles God places along the path of duty. The interior of the ship felt wrong the moment they crossed below deck. Not dangerous in the way men trained for combat recognized. No sudden movement, no raised voices, no gunmetal tension. But wrong in a quieter, heavier way. The air was stale, layered with oil and rust, yet threaded with something else. The faint, unmistakable presence of human life that had been pressed too long into too little space. The man slowed his pace. His boots no longer followed the rhythm drilled into muscle memory. Each step became deliberate, measured, as though the floor itself might remember who had walked on it last. The dog felt it too. The 5-year-old German shepherd moved at the man's side, shoulders rolling smoothly beneath his black and tan coat, muscles compact and ready. His ears remained upright, rotating subtly as if mapping invisible lines through the darkness. His amber-brown eyes no longer scanned for threat, but for absence, an absence that carried weight. The faint scar on his left shoulder pulled slightly as he shifted. A reminder of other rooms, other nights, where survival had demanded speed over certainty. The corridor opened into a wider compartment. That was where the first sign appeared. A child's shirt lay folded on a crate. It was small, too small to belong to any crewman, and strangely clean, as though someone had tried to preserve it. The fabric was thin, the color once bright, now dulled by salt and time. It sat there with a quiet defiance, a detail that should not have existed on a ship officially listed as empty. The man crouched, gloved fingers brushing the cloth. He did not pick it up. He did not need to. The message was already clear. Further along, they found food, not stacked or stored the way smugglers prepared for themselves, but broken apart into portions so small they barely counted as meals. Bread divided unevenly, dried rice wrapped in scraps of plastic, evidence of hands that knew hunger intimately and tried to stretch mercy out of nothing. Still, there was no sound, no crying, no whispering, no movement. The absence was worse than noise. The dog stopped again, his head tilted slightly, nose drawing in short, careful breaths. His tail lifted just enough to signal focus. He turned toward a steel wall that looked identical to every other section of the corridor. No markings, no seams that betrayed its secret. The man raised his fist. The team halted. He studied the wall and then the dog. The animal's posture was rigid now, body angled forward, chest vibrating with a low sound that never rose into a bark. His attention was not aggressive. It was protective. "There," the man said quietly. They cut through the steel with controlled precision, sparks scattering briefly before dying in the damp air. When the panel finally gave way, it fell inward with a dull clang that echoed louder than expected. Light spilled into the hidden space. 6 figures stared back at them. 3 women, 3 children. They were packed tightly into the narrow compartment, knees drawn to chests, backs pressed against one another for balance and warmth. Their faces were hollow, skin stretched thin over bone, eyes wide but unnervingly dry. These were people who had learned that crying wasted energy and invited punishment. One woman sat nearest the opening. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, but exhaustion had carved years into her posture. Her frame was slender, shoulders sloped forward protectively. Dark hair hung loose and tangled around her face, strands clinging to skin pale beneath layers of grime. Her hands trembled as she held an infant close, palm pressed firmly over the child's mouth. The baby did not struggle, did not fuss. The woman's eyes flicked up sharply when the light hit her, then darted toward the corridor behind the team. She did not relax. She did not plead. "Don't cry," she whispered, barely audible. Her voice was hoarse, scraped raw by fear and restraint. "Crying makes them come back." The words landed heavily in the man's chest. Behind her stood a little girl. She was small, undernourished, her limbs thin beneath the oversized jacket she wore. The jacket swallowed her shoulders, sleeves hanging past her hands, clearly taken from someone larger, perhaps a parent she no longer had, or one she had been separated from too quickly to understand. Her dark hair fell messily to her shoulders, and her bare feet were cracked and dirty, toes curling slightly against the cold metal floor. She did not step back when she saw the men. She did not step forward either. Her gaze moved past the weapons, past the helmets, past the man himself. It settled on the dog. Something shifted in her expression. Not relief, not fear, but recognition, as if she had seen this shape before in another life, in a place where safety had still been possible. The dog met her gaze, He lowered himself slightly, posture easing, tail resting against the floor. His ears remained upright, but his eyes softened, losing the sharp edge of alertness. He did not move closer. He did not retreat. He waited. The man removed his jacket and draped it gently around the girl's shoulders. She accepted it without resistance, fingers clutching the fabric as though it might disappear if she loosened her grip. "We're taking you out," the man said, voice steady, controlled, quietly. No one argued. As they prepared to move, the girl took a small step forward. Her hand reached out, not toward the man, not toward the light, but toward the dog. Her fingers brushed the black tactical harness at his chest, then slid upward until they found the simple black collar at his neck. She held it lightly, not pulling, not clinging. Her lips moved. The words barely existed as sound. "Stay." The man did not hear it. The dog did. His body stiffened, not in alarm, but in acknowledgement. His breathing slowed. His eyes never left the girl's face. Then the moment passed. The man signaled the team, and they began their withdrawal. Later, long after reports were filed and explanations demanded, the man would struggle to explain why his chest had tightened just before they left that compartment. He would remember the way the dog hesitated, not as if awaiting orders, but as if accepting responsibility. At the time, he dismissed it as tension. Only later would he understand that some promises are heard without words. They moved through the corridor in silence, bodies forming a protective barrier around the rescued civilians. The woman with the infant kept her head down, lips pressed to the child's hair, breathing shallow and controlled. The girl walked beside the dog, one hand still brushing his collar as if afraid to let go. The man glanced back once, intending to reassure her. Instead, he caught the dog looking forward with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. That was when the engine roared above them. The sound tore through the ship, sudden and violent, shattering the fragile calm. Voices shouted. Footsteps thundered from the upper deck. The girl's fingers tightened briefly on the dog's collar. The man's hand went instinctively to his weapon. He did not yet know who would stay behind. But the question had already been asked. If this chapter touched your heart, please like, share, and comment below. Subscribe to Angels in Uniform to continue discovering stories of courage, compassion, and the quiet miracles God places in the darkest places. The retreat began the way retreats always did. Quiet, disciplined, almost methodical. The team shifted formation without speaking, bodies angling to shield the rescued civilians as they moved back through the narrow corridors. The ship groaned softly around them, metal expanding and contracting with the change in temperature, as if the vessel itself were uneasy about what it had been forced to hold. The man stayed near the center, close enough to see every face, far enough to react to anything that broke through the dark. His posture was controlled, shoulders squared beneath the weight of his plate carrier, eyes scanning angles and shadows with practiced calm. His heart rate was steady. Training had done its work. At his side, the dog moved differently now. The 5-year-old German Shepherd no longer walked with the fluid confidence of search mode. His pace had slowed just enough to place himself deliberately between danger and the smallest body in the group. His black and tan coat brushed lightly against the girl's oversized jacket as she walked, her hand hovering close to his collar, never quite touching again, but never straying far. His ears rotated constantly, catching every echo, every shift of air. His amber-brown eyes were alert, but something deeper had settled there, an intensity that went beyond command. The man noticed it. He tightened his grip on the dog's harness briefly, a silent question. dog did not look back. They reached the stairwell leading up to the main deck. That was when the engine roared. The sound erupted above them without warning, raw and violent, tearing through the silence like a blade. The deck vibrated under their feet. Shouts followed, angry, panicked, and close. The girl froze. Her breath hitched, a sharp intake she struggled to suppress. The woman behind her tightened her hold on the infant, hand pressing harder over the small mouth. The man raised his arm, signaling halt. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs. He was not imposing in stature, average height, lean to the point of sharpness. But desperation had carved something feral into his movements. His face was narrow, skin darkened by sun and stress, eyes darting wildly, as if calculating losses instead of lives. Stubble covered his jaw unevenly, and sweat streaked down his temples. His rifle shook in his hands, not from fear of death, but from fear of losing control. He fired. The first shot cracked past the group, slamming into the metal wall behind them. The second came faster, lower. The man saw the trajectory in the same instant his body reacted. His arm moved instinctively, shifting the girl behind him. But the dog was already moving. There was no command, no signal, no training cue. The dog changed direction sharply, muscles coiling and releasing in a single, powerful motion. His paws skidded on the damp deck, claws scraping against metal as traction failed for a fraction of a second. Time stretched thin, then his body launched, forward. The impact was heavy and final. The bullet struck flesh instead of bone meant for a child. The dog collapsed hard against the deck, black and tan form sliding across metal before coming to rest between the shooter and the girl. Blood spread quickly, dark and wet pooling beneath him and seeping toward the drains along the deck. The smell of iron cut through the salt air. The man dropped to his knees. He did not shout commands. He did not fire. He pressed his forehead to the dog's, one gloved hand cupping the strong skull that had so often leaned into his touch. The dog's breathing was ragged now, shallow but stubborn. His eyes remained open, focused not on the pain, not on the shooter, but on the man. "It's okay," the man whispered, voice breaking despite himself. "You did good. You did so good." The shooter fled. The moment passed in chaos, returned fire, shouted orders, the rush of bodies moving again. But for the man, the world had narrowed to the weight of the dog beneath his hands, and the truth pressing into his chest. They carried the dog. The extraction blurred into fragments, the thud of boots, the whine of the helicopter blades cutting into the night, the way the girl's eyes never left the dog as they were lifted aboard. The woman wept silently now, shoulders shaking, tears falling without sound. The man felt the pain in his leg only after they were airborne. A sharp, burning ache flared along his thigh, radiating downward with each movement. He looked down to see blood seeping through torn fabric where a shard of metal had torn into him during the chaos. The wound was not catastrophic. He could still stand, still move, but every step hurt. As the helicopter rose, the dog stirred weakly. His front legs twitched, claws scraping faintly against the floor, instinct urging him to stand. His back legs did not respond. They lay still, unrecognizing, as if no longer part of him. The dog tried again and again. The man watched, breath caught in his throat, as realization dawned. Not all at once, but slowly, cruelly. Some choices save a life. Some choices take something else forever. The medical bay was bright and cold. Hands moved efficiently around the dog, voices calm and clinical. But the man heard very little of it. He stood nearby, weight shifted awkwardly off his injured leg, jaw clenched against the pain. His watch pressed uncomfortably against his wrist, ticking just out of sync with the machines around them. The dog lay on the table, chest rising and falling with effort. His ears flicked once at the sound of the man's voice when he spoke his name softly. His eyes followed him as he moved, tracking familiar presence even as his body failed him. The man reached out, fingers brushing the fur along the dog's neck. "You stayed," he murmured. The words surprised him as they left his mouth. He thought of the girl's face, of the way her fingers had rested on the dog's collar, of the whispered word he had not heard. The helicopter touched down. Reports would be written, statements recorded, numbers assigned to losses and successes. The mission would be called a victory. But as the dog was wheeled away, rear legs still and useless, the man understood something that no report would ever capture. He could still walk. The dog could not. They had both paid, but only one of them had chosen the price without being asked. The man placed his weight down on his injured leg and stood straighter, pain flaring sharply up his spine. He welcomed it. It anchored him to the moment, to the cost of what had been done. Behind him, the sea stretched on endlessly, indifferent and vast. Ahead of him lay questions with no clean answers, and the heaviest of them pressed into his chest with every step he took. What was the true cost of choosing instinct over command? If this chapter moved you, please like, share, and comment below. Subscribe to Angels in Uniform to continue exploring stories where faith, sacrifice, and quiet miracles meet in the line of duty. The helicopter arrived with the sound of inevitability. Its rotors cut the night air into violent pieces, washing the deck in wind and noise and a sense of ending that felt premature. Hands reached out from the open door, efficient and practiced, pulling the rescued civilians up one by one. Blankets wrapped around thin shoulders, bottles of water pressed into shaking hands. Someone murmured reassurances in a language the woman barely understood. But the tone was enough. Safety had a sound. The man watched from the edge of the deck. Weight shifted carefully onto his good leg, pain blooming sharply through his thigh every time he adjusted his stance. He ignored it. Pain was honest. Pain could be managed. What settled deeper in his chest had no clean edges. The girl was lifted last. She clutched the blanket around her shoulders with both hands, eyes wide, scanning the deck once more. For a moment, her gaze found the dog, lying motionless near the bulkhead, medics kneeling around him. Her breath caught. She leaned forward instinctively, reaching out. Then the helicopter crew pulled her gently inside. The door slid shut. The helicopter rose, carrying lives away from the ship and into the dark sky, shrinking quickly into a distant shape that vanished as though it had never been there at all. Silence rushed back in. The dog remained on the deck. The medics worked with quiet urgency. One of them, a middle-aged man with a broad build and tired eyes, pressed gauze against the wound, hands steady despite the slick of blood. His hair was graying at the temples, his jaw heavy with the kind of calm that came from seeing too much and still choosing to show up. He spoke softly to the dog, not because the dog could understand the words, but because tone mattered. "You're okay, buddy," he said. "Stay with us." The dog's chest rose and fell, shallow but persistent. His ears twitched faintly at the sound of the man's voice. His eyes were open, glassy with pain yet stubbornly alert, tracking movement as if the world still required his attention. The man knelt beside him. His gloved hand rested against the dog's neck, fingers pressing gently into warm fur. He felt the tension there, the effort it took for the dog to keep breathing evenly. The dog turned his head slightly, eyes finding the man's face, and for a brief, terrible moment, the man feared he was looking at goodbye. Easy, he whispered, voice low, steady. You're still here. The dog blinked once. The wound was stabilized. The dog was alive. But when they tried to move him, something became unmistakably wrong. The dog's front legs responded when the medics lifted him, muscles tightening reflexively, claws scraping against the deck. His back legs did not. They hung limp, unresponsive, disconnected from the urgency still burning in the rest of his body. The dog whined softly, not in pain, but in confusion. The man felt something fracture quietly inside him. They transported the dog to the medical bay as the ship's engines powered down. The bay was harshly lit, sterile in contrast to the chaos outside. Machines hummed, monitors beeped with mechanical indifference. The dog was laid carefully on the table, straps securing him as the medical team assessed damage that no one wanted to name out loud yet. The man leaned against the wall, one hand braced against cold metal, breathing through the sharp throb in his leg. He watched the dog's chest rise and fall, watched the way the dog's eyes followed him even when he moved out of direct view. The dog trusted him. That trust weighed more than any weapon he had ever carried. A few hours later, the formalities began. A senior officer entered the bay, clipboard tucked under one arm. He was tall, clean-shaven, posture rigid with professionalism. His uniform was immaculate, untouched by blood or salt, and his expression carried the practiced neutrality of someone who delivered outcomes, not feelings. He glanced briefly at the dog, then at the man. "Hostages recovered," he said. "All alive." The man nodded once. "Resistance encountered," the officer continued, eyes already moving down the page. "Neutralized. Casualties acceptable." He cleared his throat and read the line that would later appear unchanged in the official report. "Target engaged due to concern over loss of assets." The words hung in the air. Assets. The man said nothing. On paper, it was clean, efficient. The mission objectives had been met. Lives saved, threat removed, the kind of outcome that earned commendations and quiet nods in briefing rooms. No box existed on the form for what lay motionless on the table behind them. The officer signed off and left. The room felt emptier for his absence. The dog stirred. His ears flicked. His eyes opened fully now, clearer than before, searching. His front legs twitched, muscles tightening as instincts surged back to the surface. He pushed against the restraints, attempting to rise. "Easy," the medic said quickly, placing a hand against the dog's shoulder. "Easy." The dog tried again. His front legs pressed down, powerful and sure, lifting his chest a few inches off the table. His back legs remained unmoving. The effort tipped him off balance. He fell. The sound was small, barely more than a thud against padding, but it echoed inside the man's chest like a gunshot. The dog did not cry out. He lay there, breathing hard, eyes wide with something dangerously close to panic. His head lifted as he tried to understand why the rest of his body would not follow. The man stepped forward without thinking, pain flaring through his injured leg as he reached the table. He placed both hands on the dog's chest, steadying him, grounding him. "It's okay," he said again, the words worn thin, but all he had. "You're okay." The dog's eyes locked onto his. Slowly, gradually, the frantic edge softened. His breathing steadied. He stopped trying to stand. But the realization had landed. Later, when the dog was moved to recovery, the man sat alone in the quiet that followed. His leg throbbed with every heartbeat now, the ache deep and insistent. He welcomed it. Pain reminded him that something real had happened, that the night had not been swallowed whole by paperwork and procedure. He thought of the helicopter lifting away, of the girl's eyes finding the dog one last time, of the words she had whispered, though he still did not know it yet. The report would say the mission was a success. The world would call it victory. But as the man stood slowly, putting weight on his injured leg, grimacing as pain shot upward, he understood something with a clarity that left no room for comfort. He could still walk. The dog could not. And nothing written on paper could balance that equation. As the lights dimmed in the recovery bay, the dog lifted his head slightly, ears angling toward the doorway, as if listening for someone who was no longer there. His tail did not move. His back legs did not stir. Yet his eyes remained fixed on the exit, waiting, not for commands, but for purpose. The man watched and felt a question form that no report could answer. If the body can no longer serve, does the calling end? The ship began its slow return to port. The sea stretched endlessly around them, calm and untroubled, as though nothing of consequence had occurred upon its surface. The man stood alone near the rail, wind tugging at his clothing, the faint smell of antiseptic clinging to his gloves. Behind him, in the quiet bay, the dog slept. Ahead of him lay conversations he did not want to have, and decisions he did not yet know how to face. The mission was over. The cost was not. If this chapter stirred something in you, please like, share, and comment below. Subscribe to Angels in Uniform to continue walking with us through stories where sacrifice meets faith and quiet miracles are written beyond the battlefield. Home did not arrive with relief. It arrived quietly, like a door closing somewhere behind him that he could no longer open. The man lived alone now, in a small coastal house weathered by salt and time. The walls were bare except for necessity. No photographs, no medals, no reminders that could argue with memory. Each morning the sea lay stretched before him, wide and indifferent, a flat line of blue-gray that seemed to erase distance and consequence alike. Sleep came in fragments, when it came at all. At night, he lay awake on the floor beside the dog's bed, listening to the rhythm of breathing, his own shallow and uneven, the dog's slower, deeper, broken by sudden twitches. The 5-year-old German shepherd no longer slept the way he used to. His powerful front legs sometimes jerked as if running. His ears flicked, reacting to sounds that did not exist. Low noises escaped his throat, half-formed whimpers that never became barks. The man learned to wake before the sound grew too sharp. He would rest a hand on the dog's chest, feeling the steady warmth beneath fur, grounding them both in the present. The dog's amber-brown eyes would open, unfocused at first, then soften when recognition returned. He would sigh, long and deep, settling again. They did not speak of the night. No one did. The man's leg healed poorly, the wound closed, but pain lingered, an ache that flared when the weather shifted, when he stood too long, when memory pressed too close. Doctors called it manageable. He called it useful. Pain kept him tethered to now. The dog's back legs never recovered. They lay still behind him, unresponsive, disconnected from the will that still burned so fiercely in the rest of his body. During the day, the dog learned new ways to move, dragging himself forward with strength and determination, front legs straining, chest lifted with stubborn dignity. The man helped when he could, building ramps, adjusting space, learning patience he had never needed before. The dog never complained, never looked back. He still watched doors, still tracked movement with sharp focus, still lifted his head every time the man stood, as if waiting for something unfinished. The war had followed them home. It lived in silence, in routine, in the things neither of them said. Weeks passed before the man opened the laptop. He told himself it was administrative. Cleanup, loose ends, files that needed to be archived before they were forgotten. The mission footage sat in a folder he had avoided, its name neutral, clinical, stripped of meaning. He stared at it longer than necessary, jaw tight, breath slow. Then he clicked play. The video opened on darkness, grainy and unstable. Helmet cam footage. The ship's interior came into view, shadows stretching and collapsing as bodies moved through narrow corridors. The audio crackled with static, boots, breath. He watched without blinking. He saw himself move, saw the dog at his side, saw the civilians huddled. Together, the girl's small form wrapped in his jacket. His chest tightened. He fast-forwarded past the extraction, past the gunfire, stopping just before the moment he could not bear to see again. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the trackpad. Then, when he rewound, slowly, he adjusted the audio, filtering noise, isolating channels. The sound sharpened, harsh and cluttered, but clearer. He listened past his own breathing, past the radio chatter. And there it was. At first, he thought it was nothing, a shift of air, a whisper swallowed by static. He rewound again, and again. Finally, it broke through. Small, fragile, certain. Stay. The word hit him harder than the bullet ever had. The room went very still. He replayed it once more, hands trembling now despite his effort to remain steady. The child's voice emerged again, barely there, yet unmistakable. Not fear, not command, a plea. The dog had turned before any order was given. The dog had heard it. The man's breath hitched, sharp and involuntary. His throat tightened as understanding settled in, not all at once, but in layers, each heavier than the last. The dog had not acted on instinct alone. He had responded to something human, something sacred in its simplicity. He had stayed. The man realized then that the choice had never been his to make. The command had been given in a voice too small for reports, too soft for systems built on force. And the one who obeyed it was the only one listening. The video continued to play, but the man no longer saw it. He reached up and closed the laptop, carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter what little balance remained. He sat there for a long moment, staring at nothing, chest rising and falling unevenly. Then, without ceremony, he reached for his wrist. The old steel watch came loose easily. He held it in his palm, thumb tracing the scratches, the worn edges, the face that still ticked a fraction too slow. His father's watch, time that had never quite caught up. He placed it face down on the table. No words accompanied the gesture, no prayer, no curse, just the quiet acknowledgement that some moments could not be measured anymore. Behind him, the dog stirred. The dog dragged himself closer, front legs working methodically, determination etched into every movement. He rested his head against the man's knee, eyes lifting slowly, searching his face with calm attentiveness. The man rested his hand on the dog's head, fingers sinking into familiar fur. He did not speak. He did not need to. The dog's gaze held steady, unblinking, as if reminding him of something important, that staying was not the same as ending, and that survival carried responsibilities no one warned you about. The man exhaled slowly, the sound shaky but real. Outside, the sea murmured against the shore, waves rolling in with unhurried patience. The world continued, indifferent to the truths uncovered in quiet rooms. But something had changed. The man would never hear that word, stay, the same way again. He would carry it into every decision that followed, into every moment where walking away might be easier than remaining present. The war had followed him home, but so had the reason to endure it. If this chapter spoke to you, please like, share, and comment below. Subscribe to Angels in Uniform to continue witnessing stories where faith, sacrifice, and God's quiet miracles reveal themselves in the aftermath of duty. The offer arrived without drama. No ceremony, no pressure in the voice. Just an email followed by a short conversation that treated the past as something already concluded. The man sat across from the officer in a quiet administrative room that smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. The walls were bare, painted a neutral color meant to keep emotions from sticking. Sunlight filtered through narrow blinds, cutting the space into clean lines. The officer was younger than him, early 40s at most, with a square face and carefully trimmed beard that never quite hid the fatigue beneath his eyes. His posture was respectful but efficient, the posture of someone trained to move conversations forward. "Your record is solid," the officer said, scrolling through a tablet. "Multiple successful operations, experience with maritime environments, and K-9 handling." He paused, glanced up briefly. "Especially K-9 handling." The man nodded once. He did not correct him. "There's a unit rotation coming up," the officer continued. "They're looking for someone with your background, a new dog, fully trained, good temperament." He turned the screen slightly. The words were simple, clinical, experienced K-9 handler, suitable for reassignment. No mention of names, no mention of nights, no mention of costs. The man's leg ached as he shifted in his chair, a dull reminder that never fully faded. He listened without interrupting, eyes calm, expression unreadable. "Take some time," the officer said finally. "But we'd like an answer soon." The man stood when the meeting ended, thanked him politely, and walked out into the open air. The sea greeted him first. He lived close enough now that he could hear it even from the parking lot, the steady rhythm of waves rolling in, retreating, returning. The same sound that had followed him through so many nights of sleep that never quite settled. The dog waited by the door of the house when he returned. 5 years old, black and tan coat catching the afternoon light, eyes bright despite everything. His back legs lay motionless beneath him, useless, but his posture was upright, alert. When the man stepped inside, the dog lifted his head immediately, ears angling forward, attention sharp and complete. Always ready. The man knelt and rested a hand on the dog's neck. The fur was warm, familiar. "They asked," he said quietly. The dog did not move, but his tail thumped once against the floor. Not excitement, not fear, acknowledgement. That night, the man slept little. He lay on the floor again, back against the wall, watching the ceiling shift with shadows from passing headlights outside. The old steel watch sat on the table nearby, face still turned downward. He did not reach for it. He thought of the girl's voice. "Stay." The word no longer echoed like a command. It felt more like a responsibility. Just before dawn, the dog stirred and dragged himself toward the open door. He stopped there, nose lifted, breathing in the morning air. The sea was quiet, the horizon pale with early light. The dog did not look back at the man this time. He stared outward, as if guarding something invisible. For a brief moment, the man wondered if the dog was still on watch, not for threats, but for meaning. The decision did not come as a revelation. It came as a release. Later that day, the man returned to the base. He sat at a different desk this time, across from a clerk who looked barely old enough to shave regularly. The clerk slid a form across the surface, pen resting neatly at the top. The man read it once. Then he signed, not in the space marked acceptance, in the margin below. His handwriting was steady. Some commands should only be carried out once. The clerk hesitated, confused, then nodded and processed the paperwork without comment. The man left without looking back. Weeks passed. Life slowed into something quieter, more deliberate. The man found work where his skills still mattered, but his body was not asked to sacrifice what it no longer could. He volunteered at a coastal community center where children learned to swim and basic water safety. The ocean frightened many of them. It had taken more than it had given. He understood that fear. One afternoon, a small group gathered at the edge of the water. The children were wrapped in towels, faces bright with anticipation and anxiety. The man stood knee-deep in the surf, calm and patient, demonstrating breathing and balance. One girl stayed back. She was about 7, thin, with dark hair pulled into a loose braid. Her skin was pale from spending too much time indoors, and her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. She watched the water with wide eyes, feet planted firmly in the sand. The man noticed. He did not call to her. He did not insist. He walked back and sat down beside her instead, lowering himself slowly to her level. The dog lay nearby on the boardwalk, head raised, eyes following every movement. "It's okay," the man said gently. "You don't have to go in today." The girl looked at him, surprised. She nodded, relief flickering across her face. They sat there together, watching waves roll in and retreat, learning that staying could sometimes mean not moving at all. The dog rested his chin on his front paws, gaze fixed on the water, tail still, guarding. As the sun dipped lower, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out the old steel watch. He turned it over in his hand, then fastened it back onto his wrist. It was still slow, but it was running. The dog shifted beside him, lifting his head slightly as if acknowledging the familiar weight of time returning. No orders were given, no command spoken, yet the work continued. The man rose slowly, leg aching, and stood facing the horizon. The dog remained beside him, steady and present, eyes scanning the distance. They were no longer part of the unit, but they had not stopped serving. And as the sea breathed in and out, before them, the answer settled quietly into place. That night, they had saved each other. If this final chapter moved you, please like, share, and comment below. Subscribe to Angels in Uniform to continue sharing stories where faith, sacrifice, and God's quiet miracles remind us that service does not end when the uniform comes off. Sometimes the miracle is not the bullet that misses, not the body that survives, and not the ending we hoped for. Sometimes the miracle is the strength to stay when leaving would be easier, the courage to choose love over duty, and the grace to carry loss without letting it turn our hearts cold. God does not always remove the storm, but He places someone in it who listens when others cannot, who protects when no command is given, and who reminds us that every life has value beyond what the world calls success. In our daily lives, we may never stand on a battlefield or wear a uniform, but we are still asked to protect what is fragile, to stay when fear tells us to run, and to become the quiet miracle someone else is praying for. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who may need hope, and leave a comment telling us what this story meant to you. Subscribe to Angels in Uniform to continue walking through stories of faith, sacrifice, and unseen courage. And may God watch over you and your loved ones, grant peace to your hearts, strength for your battles, and light in every dark place you walk through. Amen.